from the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. Consider This, a program of issues and information behind today's news.
Hi everyone, I'm Kathy Wyatt. Welcome to the 26th season and this week's edition of Consider This. Our topic, childhood poverty. Joining us to talk more about it are Josie Gaddy Schaefer, Director for Public Affairs Research at UNO, Juliet Summers, Executive Director for Voices for Children, and joining us via Zoom, Brady Rhodes. Brady is the Collaborative Coordinator for the Community Impact Network. Thank you all so much for being here and welcome.
Thank you, Kathy, so much.
You bet.
Important topic.
You bet. Dr. Schaefer, I am going to start with you. How do you define poverty?
Poverty is an income measure. It's about how much you earn per year. And I think a lot of people would think it's actually about how much you spend or cost of living, but the focus and the official measurement is really about how much income. And so it's about not having enough income to meet basic needs.
Okay, so causes for poverty.
Sure. I think it's important to think about why someone wouldn't make enough income to sustain a healthy cost of life, quality of life. And so we can think about some of those factors here in Nebraska. The folks most likely to be in poverty, folks with lower levels of educational attainment, so less than a high school education or just a high school degree. And that's not because of educational attainment, but access to jobs that would allow them to earn more money. So lower levels of income, jobs that pay less, a couple other factors. Folks are more likely to be in poverty if they have a disability, again, their inability to work, as well as single-parent households. And again, not because of their single parents, but because income is so important to reducing poverty. When you have one earner, it really limits your ability to move out of poverty.
All right, big picture, U.S. Census Bureau 2020. So broad strokes, what are we talking when we talk specifically about childhood poverty?
So I think it's first important to talk a little bit about how we measure poverty, because there are a couple different indicators, a couple different measures, a couple different estimates that you'll see out there. So I think sometimes folks aren't really clear what is that poverty rate. So the traditional measure from the U.S. Census Bureau is a really simple equation, and it's income. It takes into account income and then how many folks are in the household. So it does not take into account geography. It is inflation adjusted annual. That threshold is really set based on the cost of groceries and goods, which is really only one factor when you think about what someone would have to pay for in a year, in a household especially. But just for a reference mark, a family of 4, so 2 adults, 2 children under age 18, that poverty threshold nationally is just a little over $27,000, a little under $28,000 actually. That's not a ton of money. So our poverty measure is not particularly nuanced, doesn't really encapsulate a lot of folks. There are supplemental measures that do take into account geography and other cost of living items like housing and out-of-pocket medical expenses. But when we measure poverty, it's a real flat line threshold, and it's based on just income and the size of the household.
Okay, thank you for that. So when we look at those numbers coming out of 2020 before we drill down and get here to our state? What is it looking like, big picture?
So going into 2020, we had some of the lowest levels of poverty nationally and in Nebraska that we had seen in recent history. I pulled some numbers going back to 2010, and it could have been upwards of like 16% back then, and it had consistently come down into the about 12% for that under age 18. 2020 was a year that very few of us expected and had lots of impacts. We do lots of research at the Center for Public Affairs Research on workforce, and we had unprecedented layoffs, and particularly in low-income industries like food service, accommodation, and so that put a lot of stress on those that were already likely in poverty, pushed those numbers up. They weren't huge jumps here in Nebraska, but they were going up, and that was not a trend we had seen for a while.
Okay, so you've referenced it. We're going to put up a graphic for our viewers. Tell us when that goes up what we are seeing there.
Sure. This is the percent of the population in poverty that's under age 18 for that benchmark year of 2020 by county. And so counties with a lighter shade have lower levels of poverty. Well, you can see some of those darker shades, upwards of 35% in poverty. And you'll actually notice that that's not in urban areas of the state, metros like Omaha and Lincoln. That is in some of the more rural areas, which is a trend we see in both childhood poverty as well as population over age 65. That percent in poverty is higher in rural areas compared to urban areas of the state. So you can get an idea, right, if that benchmark is about 12%, 13% for population under age 18 in poverty, you can see lots of variation across the state, and many rural counties in particular much higher.
Okay. Yeah, let's go to the next one here.
This is just population age under 5. Just to drill down, again, when more children are in a family, the threshold goes up a little bit more, right? Because you have more mouths to feed, more mouths to house. So you do usually see the percent of poverty a little higher for those under age 5. Now, across the state, it's right around 15%. And again, you can see a lot of variation county to county, with many rural counties being higher.
Dr. Schaefer, thank you for that. So you've done a great job in kind of setting the stage here from a statistical standpoint. We have Juliet Summers with us as well. She's going to help us put a face to this problem. Before I get into the questions, though, I think it would be really important for our viewers to know a little bit about Voices for Children.
Sure, and thank you so much for having me on to talk about this really important issue. So I'm Juliet Summers. I'm the Executive Director of Voices for Children in Nebraska. We actually just celebrated our 35th anniversary as a statewide child data research, engagement, and advocacy organization. Our mission is to ensure that every child in the state of Nebraska has the opportunity to thrive. And we do that through data. We put out the Kids Count report every year, looking at indicators of child well-being in our state. We do that through engagement with communities that have lived experience of our systems. And then we do that through skilled advocacy at the state and local level.
When Dr. Schaefer is talking about the numbers the way that she was, and we're looking at maps like we did, what is somebody like you thinking, right?
Yeah. So I'm both a data person. We love data in our house too. But I also immediately think of the children and the parents who are trying to make a life for their families here in our state. And I see both real challenges, and I also see real opportunities. So as Dr. Schaefer was talking about us as a state driving down childhood poverty consistently over the last decade, each one of those statistics represents a child who is no longer worried about whether they're going to have dinner when they come home, who is, consistently able to live in the same home through the years. And that allows them to stay in the same school district and achieve academic success. So, the numbers are crucial because they ground us in reality in our state. but you have to remember that behind each number is a child and a family.
So for viewers who are fortunate enough not to have experienced what it is that we're talking about, tell us what this is like for, and I'm just going to go with a family of 4, although you mentioned obviously that with more children it becomes far more difficult, but just a family of 4 living in what has been defined as poverty. What does that look like?
Sure, yeah. So when we think about a family of 4 living in poverty, let's say it's a 2-parent household and 2 children. Each of the parents maybe is working full-time at Nebraska's current rate of minimum wage, which is $9 per hour. If those 2 parents are working every single day, no vacations, no days off, no sick days, which we know is all unrealistic with kids, but say they are, they would bring home just over $37,000 between them for the entire year. Now let's imagine one of those children is in elementary school and one of them is a toddler, so they still need childcare in order to be able to work. The average cost of childcare for, say, a home provider for a toddler is about $10,000. And then if we're thinking about rent, a 2-bedroom apartment is about $12,000 for a year. So if you think about just those costs, this family of 4 has only about $15,000 left over for everything else. That's healthcare, transportation, food, not even to speak of all the little costs that come with children that I know we're all aware of. And if you think about being a child growing up in this household, there's added responsibility there that kids who are in a higher income bracket may not experience. So if this elementary school child gets sick, their parent might not be able to take off work. So they either have to go to school sick or they stay home by themselves. If the baby gets sick, then that older child might have to stay home to take responsibility for care. There's less likelihood of preventive medical care, so increased likelihood of childhood illnesses or dental issues. Any day if the family gets behind on rent, you might suddenly lose your home that's been your home for some time. And I think particularly about food. So 1 in 10 children in Nebraska is food insecure. And that means that at some point in the year, they didn't know where their next meal was coming from. So for many children who are growing up in poverty in a family like this one, those school meals, breakfast and lunch, might be the only ones they can count on. And weekends feel scary. Summers feel especially scary, particularly in areas of our state that don't have a designated summer meals site or program. And I want to be clear that we shouldn't equate a family living in poverty with neglect or with parents not caring for their kids or families not having resilience and protective factors around them. Parents in every income bracket love their children and want the best for their children and do the best that they can. But poverty can undercut that in big ways and small.
You mentioned a few things here that I want to address. So the childcare and school. Sure. So let's just say we're living on a fortunate day and our child can get to both, right? We have 1 in childcare, 1 at school. But their lives are different when they go to these places. Talk a little bit about that in terms of, what the poverty means when they get out into the real world socially and some of the other ways, Juliet.
Yeah, I can think of many, many things. A really basic thing in Nebraska is how we have structured school funding. So school funding in our state is tied to property values, to property taxes. So if you are living in an area that's more affluent, has more wealth invested in real property, your schools in your area have more resources, so can provide some of those extras in education that schools that are in, rural schools in an area of higher poverty or in urban poverty may not be able to provide some of those extras for students. When you think about things like if your water heater goes out, you don't have the ability to wash your clothes in your home. You may not have that extra money to go to the laundromat and wash your clothes. So a child may be coming to school with clothes that are, unhygienic or unclean. That can impact social relationships. If you're coming to school hungry because you didn't eat the night before, or you slept in the car the night before, you're just not going to be as bright-eyed and attentive as your classmates. And these things are true for little kids too, right? Those impacts of instability or uncertainty can impact, all the way down, to the infant level.
Then you have to look at this whole notion of the vicious cycle, right? That children who are raised in a situation of and living and realizing poverty can become parents who are in that same situation, wanting something better for their own children and yet not being able to, which goes back to some of the reasons that you stated, Dr. Schaefer. Talk to us a little bit about that vicious cycle and its impact on that first child now grown into adulthood, feeling helpless, like there's nothing they're going to be able to do.
Yeah. So I think intergenerational wealth or intergenerational poverty is a really great example of how systemic choices that we make have very real impacts on individual children or individuals. So that family that I've been describing, they don't have any extra money to put into an educational savings account for their children to be able to afford higher education. They aren't able to save for a down payment, to get a mortgage, to invest their money in a home that can become an asset, real property they can pass on to the next generation. These are ways that our system is structured that allows families who currently have wealth to continue to build that wealth. Families who don't currently have wealth don't have access to those things to really leapfrog themselves out so that the next generation can reap the benefits. And I also, we haven't even talked about the health effects of poverty. So childhood poverty is what's considered an adverse childhood experience. It's medical terminology that describes certain traumatic experiences in youth, which can have lifelong impacts in health, mental health, even increased likelihood of substance use disorders or addictions. And these are very real health impacts that will follow children through their life to adulthood if they go unaddressed. And then as they are, meanwhile, inflation goes up, wages may not keep pace. And so this child is now an adult, they're starting their own family, and they haven't been able, through the way that the system is structured and the opportunities that they've had, to increase their own earning potential for their next generation, at least as everything stands right now.
Okay, which is a good segue into Brady Rhodes. I want to bring him in now and thank him for his patience. He's joining us via Zoom. Brady, you've been hearing what Juliet's been talking about in terms of, we started with the child, then we went into the family. Now with you, what I want to do for our viewers is talk community. So when Juliet is saying all the things that she's saying in terms of the impact that poverty has on the child, the family, and so forth, I would like you to address the impact on community before we get into some solutions here.
Thank you. Thanks for the question, and thanks for having me on. I'm glad to represent this conversation as well. I think with us, the way that we see that kind of intergenerational poverty working its way through the community is the community kind of gets used to it. And that's both the haves and the have-nots get used to that. And what I mean by that is that it becomes sort of the norm in a couple different ways. One way is that it helps, it causes different organizations and entities in the community to create a poverty management system that just manages the poverty that's in place. It gets used to it. It says, hey, we're going to help people that are maybe in some crisis situations, but we're not necessarily going to be accountable for getting them out of it because we're used to this happening. It's kind of the way of things. And then in our community, on the individual level, you have folks who they're not necessarily surrounded by people who are not in low-income situations either. So if you're in low-income situations, you're generally surrounded by other folks who are in the same situation. So you have that difficulty seeing things differently, seeing different opportunities, maybe not knowing what the resources are that are out there, and you get used to that kind of, this is the way things are in the world.
Okay. Brady, tell us about the Community Impact Network, if you would.
Yeah, the Community Impact Network is a collaborative. It's a community collaborative in South Central Nebraska. We represent Adams, Clay, and Nuckolls County. It is 46,000 people live in this area. It's got Hastings as kind of the municipal area in that grouping of counties, and then the rest of it's fairly rural. The Community Collaborative is one of 22 throughout the state. So this is a pretty unique thing throughout the country to have a networked set of community collaboratives. They're funded through the Nebraska Children and Family Foundation. That's a kind of a unique thing that's happening here in Nebraska to get that kind of backbone support so that there's somebody in the background that can keep the collaborative in motion. Now, people might ask, like, what's a collaborative? Well, think about all the different social service agencies, all the educational institutions, some faith institutions, government programs that are working for the benefit of people in the community. And the collaborative's job is to network all those folks together and get all those different entities talking to each other, communicating, problem solving together, sharing resources. In our case, we have a great tie-in with our mission partner, the United Way of South Central Nebraska. They're our fiscal agent. So that helps us manage the workings of the collaborative without having to worry about the day-to-day overhead expenses. So that's what the Community Impact Network is. It came out of the pandemic, actually. 2 years ago, we didn't necessarily have that kind of networked system in place. People knew each other, but they weren't necessarily connected and didn't have a system to get out the resources that were present at the time and needed. And so the Community Impact Network was formed to help kind of strategically get everybody talking together and working in the same sandbox a little bit more efficiently.
So along those lines then, briefly tell us about Bridging Forward.
Bridging Forward is the answer to the collaborative's goal of reducing poverty 30% by 2030. So the collaborative came together and said, what's our main thing that we need to address here in the community? And they identified poverty as that one umbrella issue that will impact so many other things. If we can solve this, this will get us to so many other solutions. So Bridging Forward is a unique response to the problem because it actually answers two challenging issues that we have in our community. We have an incredibly high number of job openings. In July alone, there was 1,400 job openings in our community in those 4 county areas, and we have a higher poverty rate than normal in the state. And so let's use these high job openings and get more people who are underemployed into those higher wage jobs and get their income increasing over time.
So, Brady, I understand you have alleviate 30% of poverty in the area. You tell us, is that pretty lofty? And how on earth are you going to achieve that?
It's a great lofty goal, and I'll tell you what, there's no better time than right now. We've never faced, as a state, as a country, as a community, we've never faced the opportunity to get folks who are low income, underemployed into higher wage jobs. And so this is a fantastic time to solve two birds, kind of two birds with one stone. Our employers desperately need these people as contributing members to their workforce, and these people desperately need that higher income to get them out of poverty. So the way that we're doing this, 30% number is a large number. It's 700 households. When you look at it from that standpoint, it's more than 1,800 individual people, 400 kids under the age of 18. So it's going to make a significant impact in our community, and we're going to learn so much about how to create a system to help move people out of poverty during that process. There's so much that we've got to figure out and problem solve. And I heard Juliet mention the systemic issues. That's a key piece of it. There's an individual piece that we're working on to help people move out of poverty. But there's also these systemic, large system issues like transportation, housing, workforce development that are big issue conversations to have in our community that we need to handle at the same time.
Brady, in about a minute's time frame, talk to us about the timeline on this. What are we looking for and when?
Yeah, so we've launched in June. We've had a pilot phase for the last 6 or 7 months. We are working with all the other entities in our community to really ramp up our communication, our coordination, so that we're working with people and not worrying about getting them out of crisis and into stabilization. We're spending some time there, but we're not rushing them into a job. We're taking the time to get them ready so that when they get that job, their feet are a little bit more firmly underneath them. On the other side, we're working with employers to be more ready to work with folks who have been on public assistance. That's a challenge, and some of our employers are not used to doing that, so they're having to adapt their employment patterns as well. But they're really anxious to do that because they need these workers. We need these folks to be in our community, being active, taking care of their kids, and ensuring their own financial stability.
Brady Rhodes, I want to thank you on behalf of the state for all the work that you are doing on that. Brady Rhodes, we're going to go ahead and say goodbye to you, Brady, and thank you so much. I want to go back to Juliet on what we can be doing right now as a state to help each other out.
I love that question, and it's great coming off of what Brady was talking about. I think what we need to realize is that the existence of childhood poverty in Nebraska or in our country is not a given. It's something that we have accepted as part of the status quo, and we don't have to accept it. There are fundamental ways that our system is set up that we can change if we all take action. When we think about responding to poverty, I think our minds tend to go to individual charity. So donating to a Thanksgiving dinner to a family in need or a backpack drive. And those are wonderful gifts that we can give to our neighbors in the meantime while we get the system right. But ultimately, in order to eradicate childhood poverty permanently in our state, it's going to take not just individual goodwill, but political will. And so I would encourage everyone who's watching, who cares about this issue, to get involved. It's election day today while we're filming. I hope that by the time you're watching this, you voted, and that we're asking candidates what they're going to do, how they're going to change our laws and our policies to support kids and families, and also to get involved in state and local politics on issues like housing, childcare assistance, access to food stamps, all of these things that are going to really move the needle for kids.
Talking about childhood poverty today, viewers wanting more information, we're going to put up a graphic for folks so that they can find any one of our three guests. Dr. Schaefer, of course, can be found at cpar.unomaha.edu. That's her phone number. Juliet at voicesforchildren.com, and that's her phone number. And then we heard from Brady Rhodes, bridgingforward.org with the phone number there. I want to thank all of our guests for sharing your time and expertise with us today and for advocating for our kids. Thank you so much for doing that and their families. Thanks to our students who are working so hard behind the scenes, and of course, to all of you for watching. As we close, scenes from Culture House in North Omaha, as seen through the lens of Gisela Quihangana, a junior right here at UNO. We'll see you next week.
Consider This is an issues and information program produced by UNO Television. More information and program archives can be found at nebraskapublicmedia.org/considerthis. If you'd like to share your comments about this program, call UNO Television at 402-554-2516 during regular business hours, or send an email to cwyatt@unomaha.edu.